I ran salvage crews into Verdanth Hold for 11 months before I found her, and every one of those months I told myself it was about the watercores. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. Amber Reach held 400 people on filtered runoff and stubbornness. I'd recruited half of them myself, out of the fabrication yards before the reactor seal failed and the fire took 31 of my own hires in under 6 minutes. I hadn't lit the fuse. I'd signed the roster. Some nights that felt like the same thing. So when the camp elders asked for volunteers to go back into the old dynasty gardens for the intact purification cores rumored to still be humming under all that vine and rot, I said I'd lead it myself, and I never gave anyone a reason why. The Hold had been a royal pleasure estate once, 3 centuries back, before the family that owned it lost a war and left the whole valley to the jungle. Stone terraces buckled under root systems thick as my thigh. Ornamental canals had gone to black standing water. Marble stairways ended in mid-air where the ground beneath them had slumped and rotted out, and every fountain basin I ever found was choked with a decade of leaf fall gone to black paste. The place still had a strange, ruined grandeur, like a dead man dressed in someone else's good coat. I'd walk those terraces some mornings before my crew woke and think about how quiet a place gets once everyone who loved it is gone. It wasn't so different from the fabrication yard's east wing, sealed off after the fire, where I still couldn't make myself send a crew, even for parts we needed. It also had the wardens. Nobody in Amber Reach could tell me exactly what they were for, only what they did: patrol the hold in ash-gray wraps and blank ceramic masks, and drown anything with the wrong blood in it. Ithri blood, specifically. The story went back generations, that the Hold's old irrigation heart had been built on an Ithri burial ground, and that an Ithri child found alive inside its walls was an omen the estate's original wound hadn't closed. The warden's whole discipline was closing it, quietly, in the water. Nobody at Amber Reach had seen it happen and lived to describe more than the masks. I found her on my 4th run in a sunken garden pavilion half swallowed by a flooded reflecting pool. She was pressed into a gap behind a fallen column, knees to her chest, skin the mottled green-gray of pond moss, gill slits at her throat opening and closing too fast. Her eyes were amber, enormous, and locked on me with the flat calculation of something that has already decided adults are a coin flip between food and death. I didn't kneel to her. Kneeling puts you eye to eye, and eye to eye is exactly the range something cornered decides to fight at. I stayed standing, backed off 2 full steps, and only then lowered myself to a crouch at the edge of the water, hands flat on my knees where she could see them empty. A heron startled somewhere in the canopy above the pavilion, and she flinched at the sound of it, hard enough to knock a chip of stone loose from the fallen column. I didn't move. I waited until her breathing slowed before I said anything at all. "I'm not going to make you come to me," I told her. "But I'm not leaving without knowing you're fed." She didn't speak. I learned later that Ithri children don't, not with sound, that their people talk mostly through the slow color shift of skin patterning, a language I couldn't read and she had no one left to read it to her in. But she understood tone. She came out an hour later, ate half a ration bar in 11 careful bites, and let me wrap her in a spare thermal sheet without flinching, which told me more about what she'd survived than any story could have. I called her Sael, because it was the closest my mouth could get to the pattern she flashed at her own chest, over and over, the first night, like she was trying to hand me her name. I couldn't bring her back to camp in daylight. The wardens watched every extraction route the way Amber Reach watched its own water gauges, constantly, without seeming to. So I did the only thing I knew. I hid her in plain function. She rode out under salvage tarps between 2 dead purification cores, breathing through a gap I cut myself, while I logged the crates as failed units not worth cataloging. I've kept records my whole life, out of some stubborn clerk's instinct that outlasted the yard job that trained it into me. That instinct is the only reason any of what came after was possible. 2 more sweeps came close enough to hear. Once, a warden stood not 4 meters from the crate stack, mask tilted like he was listening for a heartbeat instead of a voice. I stood between him and the crates with an empty water canister in my hands and asked him, flat, if he'd seen any working cores near the North Terrace. He didn't answer. He left. I understood, standing there, that the wardens weren't stupid, that they'd let a thing slide sometimes if you didn't force them to see it. It was the only mercy their doctrine seemed to have room for, and it wasn't much, and I took it anyway. At camp, I kept Sael in the equipment shed, off the housing rolls, the way you'd shelter anything you didn't want a census sweep or a bad rumor to find. I ran a humidifier line off the water reclaimer at night, and shut it down before dawn shift so no one would ask what it was feeding. She learned my hands faster than I learned her patterns, tugging my sleeve for water, pressing 2 fingers to her own throat when the shed got too dry for her gills, going still as stone whenever a stranger's voice carried past the door. I found her once curled into an old crate liner, skin gone a slow, dim gray I hadn't seen before, and it took me an hour of sitting nearby, saying nothing, before the color came back to something like calm. I taught her the sign for safe, which was just my palm flat against my own chest, and she used it on me, once, unprompted, on a night when the rain came down hard enough to drown out every other sound in the valley. I have not forgotten that. It was the same night I stopped thinking of the watercourse as the reason I kept going back into the hold. What broke the standoff wasn't luck, it was paper. Buried in the hold's old garden keeper's office, in a strong box my crew nearly torched for scrap, I found a ledger. Seed stock records mostly, useless to us, until I hit a page logging, relocated staff Ithri Quarter, after the dynasty's fall. A name, a destination, Grey Willow Rise, a highland enclave 11 days hard walk north, still marked active on the last working satellite relay Amber Reach had. I didn't sleep the night I found it. I sat with that ledger and Sael's small weight against my side, and understood, finally, that she wasn't an omen anybody needed to close. She was a girl with people still waiting on a road. The wardens caught us at the extraction gate on the day I finally moved to take her north. 6 of them, masks catching the gray morning light, blocking the only cart path out of the valley. Their lead spoke for the first time in 11 months of runs, a flat, patient voice, telling me the child belonged to the water, that carrying her out would only delay what the valley required. I told him no. Just that. No embellishment, no plea. I'd rehearsed nothing else because nothing else was true. And then my crew, 6 salvage hands who'd hauled dead cores through that jungle for months, without once asking why their lead insisted on daylight extractions and double-checked tarps, stepped up on either side of me, empty-handed, and stood there too. We didn't fight them, we simply didn't move, and there were more of us standing still than there were of them standing armed, and after a long, wet minute the lead warden turned his mask toward the tree line and walked his people back into it. I don't know if that was mercy or arithmetic. I've stopped needing to know. Grey Willow Rise took us in on the 11th day, half-starved and root-scratched, and a woman there with Sael's same amber eyes came off the terrace at a dead run the moment she saw the child's face. Calling a name I finally understood wasn't mine to give her. Her aunt, alive, and watching that road, it turned out, for longer than I'd been carrying my own guilt through a flooded garden looking for cores that were never really the whole reason I kept going back. Sael pressed her palm flat to her chest once more before she let go of my hand. Safe. And then she was running too, into arms that had been waiting on her the entire time I searched. I walked back down alone, and for the first time since the fire, the weight in my chest felt like something other than debt.